Hey, I'm BB Miniatures and welcome to my latest video. Scale75 has kindly sent me a pre-copy of their new Kickstarter and paint range coming out called Scale of Color Games. This is not to actually be confused with their fantasy and game range, but with Scale75 paints, with their smooth, more liquid acrylics, we can expect a lot of similar properties from their paint ranges, be it their advertisement on here is more of very high coverage, high dent pigment paint. So, reducing the amount of layering or streaking needed. So just very easy coverage of both with the brush and the airbrush, as well as they say it's, a little bit more durable. Marketing definitely towards people painting army miniatures, such as like from Games Workshop, but also, into like going into maybe into like board games or 3D printing services, etc. I think it's really cool on a side note that more and more people are just painting miniatures in general. I think it's really great to see. And this product, I think, is definitely much more geared towards that. But, you know, even though that's what their advertisement is, my interest, of course, is to see how these paints can work into my paint flow because, just to take advantage of that high pigmentation, it might yield some good results. And as you can see, I just started base coating this Kroot, one of their darker colors. I don't know the names of these colors. Honestly, I hardly, really look at the names unless, I'm really getting involved with more recipes. But since these paints are not even available, we're going to be more focusing on the various brush techniques and aspects and the properties of the paint to let you know if this paint is right for you, and also if this paint is right for me. So just judging off this here, that's after a single coat, and I didn't thin out the paint, so I didn't put any extra water in here. The only type of like water that's going to be thinning out this paint is actually just going to be a little bit of moisture that's left in my brush. Hence, I'll be painting with a number one Raphael, which I really like to do for the majority of my work. And right away, just mix again with two colors. It mixes quite well. So, the colors take on pretty nicely. And just watching your charge, and we're going to start, painting up some highlights. Pretty simple in a sense that, we're going to be doing some pretty simple techniques. Just going to be blocking in some volume highlights here, as well as, taking advantage of trying to use the brush stroke to our advantage, pushing them more towards the center of the light reflections, so we get a bit of a softer transitional edge. And just like the Scale 75 paints, if you're familiar with using their products such as Scale Color or the Fantasy and Game range, Scale 75 does have a little bit of a different feel than other acrylics. Not to scare you thinking different is bad. It's a bit more of, I would say, described as almost like a gel, a bit of a gel-like feel on the brush when you're applying it, as well as, and with that, it has a bit of a slower drying time. I think that's also due to the acrylic nature of these paints and how it's quite nice how they actually kind of settle, and those properties definitely help with these paints with such stronger coverage. Now, even just with even with what they're talking about with high pigment paint, high pigmentation doesn't always mean strong, perfect coverage. It's just as much about how the paint spreads with the help of your brush direction. But I do notice with these is that even though with the high pigmentation, I think mixed with the Scale 75 medium that they're using, like I said, a little bit of like their acrylic kind of gel medium. I don't know, if it truly is a gel or not. That's just how it feels, and that's how the other Scale 75 paints, most notably the prominent colors of the Scale color range and fantasy game range, feel like, and it translates into here. They do take a little bit getting used to compared to if you're using like Citadel or AK or other brands. But the nice thing is with the medium, and why I really like using Scale 75, is that if you just apply it, try to apply it fairly even and smoothly, but try not to disturb too much of it, it actually evens out quite nicely, and just allowing the paint to rest and not trying to over manipulate the paint. But also the nice thing is also the drying time with this is very similar to their other ranges. So, if you're familiar with those, I definitely, when you pick these up, or if you try them out, or if, getting a friend, if they get on the Kickstarter or otherwise, you'll feel a very similar notion to it in terms of how they behave. Even going more towards how, if you're familiar with those other ranges, this range, I actually don't see it so much as a completely new paint range. At least I don't. I think of it as more of like an additional complementary to the Scale color range and the fantasy and game range. Be it if you need some colors, especially for base layering and such, that you want a little bit more, you want a stronger pigmentation, you can sub these in, or also start mixing them in with your other Scale paints to either just get a little more opaque property within it, especially some of the colors maybe that struggle a little bit more with coverage. I think these paints could be mixed in with them and kind of, help juice up the colors a little bit, or help with the coverage aspects. You're not doing like multiple layers. That's never really a bad thing when it comes to like single, when I'm doing single miniatures. I quite like thinner paints just so that I have the control in the terms of value and how I like to layer up consecutive layers slowly, especially for more like display models. But I'm finding, when you're doing gaming miniatures in particular, or, you want to finish a model maybe in a day, having much more opaque paints like these would definitely give you a leg up in terms of time, the time required taken in, doing a little more of a sketchier style like this. I think will definitely help. As you can see, I'm just like layering up a few more consecutive layers, just mixing in a little more of that red in the paint just to get a few layers. Even then, it still helps to do a second layer if you just want to gain a little bit more power and a little more opacity with some of the paints, especially when you're moving up into the higher registries or the higher values. You can see now I've started to mix some of their their light yellow, very similar equivalent to like ice yellow or like pastel yellow, if you comparing it from like Vallejo or AK in that instance. But still achieving some still achieving a pretty good layer and fairly good coverage, even though I think I get a little bit sloppy in some of it, just going through here, just trying to pick out a few highlights. But in a moment, we're going to be switching consistencies and changing it up here. But if you really like layering style, layering paints with good opacity, I think that really helps, especially you get a pretty solid sketch out of here, which we can correct later by using thinning out the paint, which I'm doing here right now. So I've thinned out this red around, I would say 70-30, so 70% water, 30% pigment, and kind of just doing a couple of strokes in the mid-tone to trying to kind of use it as like a blend and trying to unify some of those layers together. And here I get the darker, the base color of the brown that I used. And we thin this out now about more of a thinner glaze consistency. So like 8 parts water to 1 part paint. And just unify the whole model and try to avoid the brightest highlights. And it thins out quite well, especially for if you want to gain more of a stronger stain with your tints. The high pigmentation I think really helps merging those colors, and a very good complement to this type of painting method and style, which is just a series of opaque layering, and then just using creating a glaze in the midtone and glaze in the shadows, just to run over the model and then kind of smoothen out some of soften out those transitions further. I'm not going in here like doing minute bridge blending and such, especially for like tabletop models. We kind of just want to sketch them in, and they'll look pretty good on there. Just switching up, doing some of the browns. Now I'm going to try to see how this paint, how kind of finer marks we can make. So I like to make a lot of I'm going to make this leather pouch and sash, I don't know what you call it, like belt thing across his chest. I'm going to try making it look a little worn, and doing a bunch of hash marks and stuff. And it still pretty solid, just mixing in some of that orange to seeing a little more of how just various other colors are working with it, and pretty good. I think it feels quite easy and nice on the brush. I think, again, like I said, so far and through my experience through this model, I think painting in this way is definitely great for tabletop painting. Really great, especially if you're playing a game like Kill Team or something, and you want you have a band of like 12 guys or 12, 14 models and such, and you want to paint them with enough detail and character with this hand painted style. But especially with the coverage and the assistance that it doesn't take, you're not spending 40 hours on a single miniature. And now with this gray here, I've switched up the consistency now, so I want to see how this paint paints with almost a 30-40%, almost a 1-to-1 like dilution, and see how the paint spreads and how it behaves. And it pretty predictably, it feels quite well. If you notice, there's a little bit more transparency in the mark just due to the dilution and just how I am applying the paint. But I think that's a pretty good test for future applications if I'm going to go into here. And again, doing a little bit of just using a bit of a wash to try to unify that blend, or that area there, and just soften up the transitions in an easy, quick method. Now again, switching back with this paint into a little more opaque, just to get a stronger line when doing these highlights running along the cylindrical part of the gun, just to get some easy volumes onto here. And also to top it off, again, this time making a wash with the brown. So this is like 8 parts water to 1 part paint, and it's really easy and really nice to work with on this wash going over. Pretty good staining power. So again, like if you want to do some tints that more heavily influence areas, this paint is pretty good for it because of the pigmentation. It doesn't break up too much, especially when you're thinning it out really thin, as well as a little bit of that extended drying time just by a bit kind of helps make the wash be a little bit more forgiving and easier to manipulate. And there's the pretty much the finished product of what I did, besides just putting some sand on the base and just giving a couple of dry brushes, again with the same paint. So yeah, I think you can expect it's pretty solid acrylic paint from Scale75, with my verdict of it being more of a complementary to the previous line of scale color rather than a completely new line of paint. I even found that, the scale color range with a large majority of their paints there have pretty good coverage, but in this set, it definitely did dial in a little bit more, especially like you got to see the biggest differences with or I saw the biggest differences, especially with their base coats, going over a single coat with a brush and getting a really strong opaque coverage really helps. And I think if you were to chain multiple models of this, doing a squad or like a war band in batch painting, that'll definitely save you some time. So also it being a good complement and expanding the scale color range, filling in a few other gaps, I definitely can start to see where, using these paints to base coat many of the materials, maybe give a few layers, and then proceed with the rest of the range from scale color, or also mixing them in between, especially if you find some of the weaker colors that, don't have as strong of a coverage. I think mixing it in with this game range will just help juice up the color a little bit, give it a little more power, a little more coverage on the model, so we're not giving multiple coats, like 2 to 3 coats, especially again when you get into an army or a squad painting scenario. Anything to reduce the amount of layering so we get good coverage is also pretty valued to help save us time. Other than that, thanks again for interest in your review. Again, if you're interested in the Scale75 Kickstarter, the link is down below in the description. And until next time, I'll catch you in a future tutorial. Thanks again for watching, and happy painting.